So Legends of Runeterra has come and gone through its first phase on its road to release, and during that phase I've spent quite a bit of time playing it. I would spend about 8 hours a day every day grinding out matches, trying different decks, as I was very eager to play one of Riot's multitude of new games. Since the servers went offline, I've been sitting around thinking about my experience and letting my opinions germinate a bit, as today I want to put forward a comprehensive review of my experience and discuss whether or not I think the game is worth playing. Quick note about me, it is worth noting I am not a card game expert, but I did spend the better part of my elementary school career obsessed with Yu-Gi-Oh! And the Pokemon trading card game, as well as spending about 2 to 3 years of playing Hearthstone very seriously when Hearthstone was first released in its beta. I've never been the best at these games, but I can do pretty well and hold my own, understanding the mechanics and strategy behind them. For reference, although I've never made it to Legend in Hearthstone, I have finished pretty much every season for those first 2 to 3 years of me playing, always around rank 5 to rank 1, somewhere around that vicinity, which is still fairly knowledgeable and can be fairly good. You might say I'm a pretty decent player, although you could also say I abused Face Hunter quite a bit. Either way though, I'm going to try and judge Legends of Runeterra as fairly as I can while drawing on some of my experience with other card games and other games in this sort of genre. Now it is important to remember that Legends of Runeterra is still in an alpha phase right now, which means that virtually everything you see in this video might change before the game is released, but there are still things that we can judge it on, basic mechanics and ideas that are put forward that we can infer likely aren't going to change in significant ways by the time the game comes out. We can also take a look at specific mechanics and decks right now to see the kinds of strategies and ideas that Riot is putting forward for the kind of vision that they have for what they probably want this game to turn into. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in talking about some of these fundamentals. Los Gates. Now let me start off by saying that trading card games are fun. Collecting and opening packs to see what you get so you can use them at a local tournament can be a really enjoyable experience, but really, what makes that fun is the card pack. These are kind of just real-life versions of loot boxes that will give you something that's a little more permanent. They're a cheap way to make money selling the promise of something awesome that you don't know what it is when you buy it, and the thrill of opening something unknown will make up for the disappointment you feel when you see what you actually got. It's the same sort of joy you get when you're gambling or playing the lottery or whatever, and as long as you understand how it works, it's fine if you want to choose to participate. But this kind of idea of packing super rare cards is pretty much the only thing that real-life trading card games have over online card games. Card games are better in virtually every other way when they are played virtually through a computer. Like if you choose to play a card game in person, you personally are responsible for understanding and keeping track of every game mechanic and card interaction yourself. Part of the fun of these games is taking basic ideas and card mechanics and stringing them together into big crazy combos. This can get pretty complicated when you have lots of cards in play and more exciting combos and spells being used one after another. If you're doing all this in real life though, it will likely involve you having to use a rulebook that you keep by your side, continuously going and checking it every turn to make sure you're doing things the way that they're supposed to be. The only way you won't need this rulebook is if you've already sunk enough hours into this that you've already memorized how everything works, or maybe the game is being played in such a simplified and easy way that you don't need the help because you aren't using crazy complicated or fun strategies. Neither of these are ideal, and it's why I personally think that card games are almost always more fun if you can play them online. By comparison, if you're playing a card game through a video game system or computer, you don't have to keep track of anything. All you have to do is play. Previous stipulations you've had to worry about, like how many cards are in a deck? Do I have a full deck? Do I have too many cards from one class or break some other stipulation that makes my deck illegal? Whose turn is it? When this, and this card interact with each other, whose abilities go off first? Can I legally play this now? Wait, this card has a 50% chance of working. Hang on, let me find a coin. There's hundreds of problems like these that continuously pop up when you play a card game in real life, but when playing a card game online, all of that is taken care of for you. Rather than getting scared about having crazy combos or cards go off, since you're worried about having to actually calculate all the interactions, you get excited because you can do whatever you want. Fill your deck, play your cards however, be as lazy or creative about it as you want. The game is obviously going to stop you from doing anything that's not allowed. The reason I bring this up is because Legends of Runeterra is clearly trying to walk a very fine line. It doesn't want to go so far as to be like a lot of other traditional card games where if you want to figure out what a card does, you have to read these crazy detailed descriptions. It feels like you're reading a novel every time you pick up a new card. The reason that other games out there like Hearthstone became so popular is because of their simplicity, not only in the gameplay itself, but in the fact that it's really easy to see what a card does, what's happening on the board, compared to some of the other more complicated traditional card games. Legends of Runeterra, though, is trying to take that Hearthstone model where there's still a very easy and clear to read board where you can understand what's happening and it can be visually very interesting for spectators, even those who haven't played the game themselves. But unlike Hearthstone, LOR seems to really be embracing the online card game genre where they can push the boundary and become something that is much more competitive with many more mechanics that can very quickly turn into these really crazy wombo combos that can be quite fun to pull off. So let's go ahead and start talking a little bit more about the fundamentals of these card games, shall we? Now, I want to make a few direct comparisons to another popular card game so I can show any of you who haven't played LOR just how the mechanics work and what's different about it. So seeing as Hearthstone is one of the biggest and most successful games in this genre, let's start there. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have played or watched Hearthstone at some point before, but just in case you need a quick refresher, this is how the game works. A match begins with two players who each have 30 health and 30 cards in a deck. The game will go back and forth between each player, taking turns where they can do whatever they want during their turn. They can place a card on the board, they can attack with any cards they've already had placed, they can use their hero power too if they want, or any sort of spells they have in their hand. You have a mana bar that you use as a resource to play cards, so if you only have 2 mana, you can only place this single 2-drop minion that has a 2 mana cost, but that's the only thing that's really limiting you. Each player's turn will likely consist of them using as many cards as they can till they run out of mana, end their turn, and then it's their opponent's turn to do the same thing. You go back and forth like this for a while with whoever's turn it is, they are the aggressor. They're going to be able to try and place as many cards as they can on the board, but they're also going to be attacking with the cards that they have placed, and they're using their minions ideally to attack enemy units and eventually make their way to a point where they're attacking their opponent's face. Once someone's face reaches 0 health, they will lose. So what's wrong with this system? Well, there's nothing inherently wrong with it if you just want a bit of casual fun, but when you start looking a bit more deeply at how these mechanics play out, you run into a few problems. The biggest issue here is this game is too easy to play. There's not that much room for strategy outside of building a crazy deck. You only have so much mana after all that you can use, and so many playable cards, with a certain number of orders in which those cards can be played. This means that it doesn't take long for even an average player to figure out what it is that they're supposed to do on their turn and play their cards accordingly. In fact, especially in some of the early turns, you might see a pro player and a complete noob placing the exact same cards in the exact same order because it's kind of obvious what you're supposed to do. The Hearthstone system also places all of the agency on the player whose turn it is. The other player isn't really present to do anything. They just have to sit and watch and see what happens and then wait for their turn, where the roles are then reversed. Ultimately, this results in Hearthstone being filled with a number of fairly easy strategies, some of which you don't really have to put that much thought into any sort of crazy decision making. Maybe the best example of this would be the classic Face Hunter strategy. This is a deck in which a player will try and flood the board with early game minions and always choose to attack their opponent's face. This is because the player whose turn it is gets to choose who their minions are attacking, and ultimately they just try and rush down their opponent, hopefully winning in a matter of minutes. Their opponent, by contrast, will just be trying to clear the board and build up some sort of tempo of their own, but considering the only way to force a Face Hunter to attack your minion minions is by placing a taunt on one of them, it's pretty tough to stop a hunter from just going face. Even in situations where someone can build up a pretty decent and maybe scary board with a number of different minions and maybe even a taunt or two, the hunter will still be able to use a number of different spells and minions as well as their hero power to just directly damage their opponent's face over and over until they win the game. There's a lot of options that allow them to go face. If you couldn't tell by my rank decay, I haven't played Hearthstone in years, and I don't know if Face Hunter is still something that people do, but for the first 3 years of this game's release, it kind of dominated the meta. It was simple and easy, and really anyone could do it, and it worked because the aggressor had all the priority in the gameplay. Now let's go ahead and compare this system to Legends of Runeterra and see how it differs. For starters, unlike in Hearthstone, this game is divided up into stages and turns. Rather than one person making all their moves and then ending their turn, here players will take turns with moves. At the start of a stage, a player will be given their mana as well as a card draw, and then they can begin going back and forth with their actions. So for example, maybe one player plays a minion, then it's the other player's turn, and they can choose to cast a spell, and then it's back to player one. Maybe they have a spell to counter that player's spell, which they then use. This goes back and forth until both players decide to end the stage, or until they both run out of viable moves they can make, at which point the stage will end, the next one will begin, and the game will continue. This means there's way more strategy in how you play for a number of different reasons. Like firstly, you can't just play everything from your hand willy-nilly, you have to consider your situation. For instance, maybe you have some minions on your bench that can attack your opponent and deal damage to them, but we also have a few minions in our hand that we have some mana, we can play that on our bench, and then we can attack with another minion that will then allow us to do potentially even more damage. That sounds pretty good, but we have to choose between these options because we can only do one of them this turn. After we do one of these, it will be our opponent's turn and he'll have a chance to respond. If we place a minion down to try and get that extra damage, then he'll be able to potentially use a slower trap spell, or he can maybe place a minion of his own and set up a defense. That makes it a fairly risky move for us to place this additional minion, whereas if we attack right now, he'll only be able to defend with what he has on his bench, but will potentially be missing out on some extra damage from our unplayed card. This is the kind of extra thought that's introduced to the game by having all these different turns and stages, and the different stages is something I haven't even really mentioned much yet. Each stage will only have one player who's able to attack while the other player can only defend. So that means when someone chooses to attack, they'll lay their minions out on the board in the order in which they wish to attack, where the defender will then choose how they want to block those attacking minions. Any minions who are unblocked will then go and hit their face, and that's the only way for a minion to attack face. This is a way more interesting dynamic than what we had in Hearthstone, because it places all of the priority on the defender. They're the one who gets to say who takes damage and who doesn't get blocked. Not only is this more interesting because it opens up layers of strategy for defenders compared to Hearthstone, where they weren't participating in the turn at all, but on top of that, both parties being involved means that more thought needs to be put in for the attacker's moves too. In Hearthstone, an attacker had all the power because they could choose who they're attacking, so that can mean they get tons of plays that are super valuable for them, like a couple of 1/1s attacking a 6/2 to kill him. Yes, that's an easy choice. But here, the defender is the one that's choosing to take advantageous trades. So now you have to think when you're attacking, is any of this damage going to make it to his face? Is there a difficult trade I'll be forcing my opponent to make? Even though it's my attack phase, should I bother attacking at all? Or maybe just wait and see if I can get some sort of crazy combo off later with more spells or more minions? These are real questions you're going to face, and they're really exciting because it makes the game much more dynamic. These systems are set up in a way where it may make the game sound complicated for my explanations, but when you play it yourself, it's still really easy to understand. Once you play a couple of games, you'll understand it very quickly, and if you want a single sentence TLDR for this kind of description of Legends of Runeterra, it probably wouldn't be unfair to say this is one of the most accessible card games that's super easy to get into, but it has way more strategy than most other card games out there, resulting in a very enjoyable competitive experience for those who seek it. And all of this I'm talking about here is just explaining the fundamentals of the game. We haven't even gotten into specific gameplay mechanics themselves yet. So honestly, I'm not well versed enough in card games to know which mechanics Riot lifted from other card games and what they were able to come up with on their own, but here are the different things that I've been really digging in the alpha. The mechanic where allies have actives that will happen when they quote-unquote survive damage is amazing. Trying to constantly deal 1 damage to all your own allies while simultaneously attacking and defending your opponent is crazy fun and super satisfying. You get to pull off all these really cool combos late game that leave your opponent wondering how they lost to a guy who was more focused on attacking himself rather than attacking you. The quick attack and stun decks with characters like Yasuo are also super interesting and really fun to play around with. I love all these weird card synergies that they create, and similarly, stun Yasuo decks are just like those Crimson decks, where they have all these mechanics like stunning and recalling, which sound really basic and not all that good on their own, but then you get these crazy combos off that suddenly allow you to just steamroll your opponent's army and win immediately, and it's amazing! Speaking of champions, the champion card mechanics are really interesting as well. Champions in this game take form of better than normal cards with really good active abilities. A champion will also have some sort of quest built into their card that, when completed, will allow them to level up and become even more powerful. All of this is a really cool mechanic that makes the game feel like it makes sense being a part of the League of Legends universe. It's not just a generic card game that was slapped with League characters for the sake of making a quick buck. Also, it's worth mentioning the process for unlocking cards is way more fair than every other card game that I've ever played. It seems like there's a fairly easy progression system that allows you to unlock virtually everything while spending little to no money yourself if you want. And even if you do spend money, you get to pick out cards yourself. No more endlessly searching through loot boxes for the one card that's going to make your deck complete. On top of that, I should also say all the different decks and champions and strategies and mechanics feel really crazy unusual. I mean, they're all unique. You don't play a deck around general ideas. You're not thinking, I'm a face deck who's trying to go face, or I'm a control hunter who's trying to control the board. Instead, you're thinking, I'm a Callista Shadow Isles deck, I'm gonna try and kill all my own cards. Or I'm a Poro deck, I'm gonna make crazy big Poros. This is still an alpha / beta / whatever, and there's plenty more release stages coming, so I'm not too sure what will be here and what will have changed by the time the game finishes rolling out. But virtually all the mechanics I played with myself have been an absolute joy to use and have made me really excited to try out more when the next phase rolls around. I'll probably be making more videos on some of those, by the way. But in conclusion, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Anyone who knows me personally knows that whenever I get my hands on something new, I am often quick to crown it the best thing ever. I'm quick to say that every new movie I like is the best movie ever, every new game I like is the best game ever. And similarly, I was quick to say that the auto chess style games that we were seeing with the likes of Teamfight Tactics, that they were the best thing ever. They were the next evolution of card games because they brought forth new mechanics and ideas to a genre that was almost becoming stale with its RNG, repetitiveness, and lack of fun reasons to play after 100 hours. But Legends of Runeterra has quickly made me change my tune. I have never played a game that has been more easy to create your own fun strategies, learn new decks, have all this enjoyable experience, while still having a seemingly incredible competitive scene that can have tons and tons of hours sunk into different strategy and ideas for how to play it at the most efficient way. This is something that I have really had an unimaginable amount of joy playing, and I cannot wait for the next alpha and beta releases. I'm really excited to grind out some matches in solo queue in the upcoming year. Anyway though, look out for more LOR content on my channel as well as streams, especially in November when the next phase is released for another 5 days. I will see you all then, but until then, thank you very much for watching, good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.